is no single definition of risk. Economists, behavioral scientists, risk jurists, statisticians, and actuaries each have their own concept of risk. However, risk historically has been defined in terms of uncertainty. Based on this concept, risk is defined as uncertainty concerning the occurrence of a loss. For example, the risk of being killed in an auto accident is present because uncertainty is present. The risk of lung cancer for smokers is present because uncertainty is present. The risk of flunking a college course is present because uncertainty is present. Employees in the insurance industry often use the term risk in a different manner to identify the property or life that is being considered for insurance. For example, in the insurance industry, it is common to hear statements such as, "That driver is a poor risk," or "That building is an unacceptable risk." Finally, in the economics and finance literature, authors often make a distinction between risk and uncertainty. The term risk is often used in situations where the probability of possible outcomes can be estimated with some accuracy, while uncertainty is used in situations where some probabilities cannot be estimated. As such, many authors have developed their own concept of risk, and numerous definitions of risk exist in the professional literature. Because the term risk is ambiguous and has different meanings, many authors and corporate risk managers use the term loss exposure to identify potential losses. A loss exposure is any situation or circumstance in which a loss is possible, regardless of whether a loss occurs. Examples of loss exposures include manufacturing plants that may be damaged by an earthquake or flood, defective products that may result in lawsuits against the manufacturer, possible theft of company property because of inadequate security, and potential injury to employees because of unsafe working conditions. Finally, when the definition of risk includes the concept of uncertainty, some authors make a careful distinction between objective risk and subjective risk. Objective risk. Objective risk, also called degree of risk, is defined as the relative variation of actual loss from expected loss. For example, assume that a property insurer has 10,000 houses insured over a long period, and on average, 1% or 100 houses burn each year. However, it would be rare for exactly 100 houses to burn each year. In some years, as few as 90 houses may burn. In other years, as many as 110 houses may burn. Thus, there is a variation of 10 houses from the expected number of 100, or a variation of 10%. This relative variation of actual loss from expected loss is known as objective risk. Objective risk declines as the number of exposures increases. More specifically, objective risk varies inversely with the square root of the number of cases under observation. In our previous example, 10,000 houses were insured, and objective risk was 10 over 100 or 10%. Now, assume that 1 million houses are insured. The expected number of houses that will burn is now 10,000, but the variation of actual loss from expected loss is only 100. Objective risk is now 100 over 10,000 or 1%. Thus, as the square root of the number of houses increased from 100 in the first example to 1,000 in the second example, objective risk declined to 1/10 of its former level. Objective risk can be statistically calculated by some measure of dispersion, such as the standard deviation or the coefficient of variation. Because subjective risk can be measured, it is an extremely useful concept for an insurer or a corporate risk manager. As the number of exposures increases, an insurer can predict its future loss experience more accurately because it can rely on the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers states that as the number of exposure units increases, the more closely the actual loss experience will approach the expected loss experience. For example, as the number of homes under observation increases, the greater is the degree of accuracy in the proportion of homes that will burn. Subjective risk. Subjective risk is defined as uncertainty based on the person's mental condition or state of mind. For example, assume that a driver with several convictions for drunk driving is drinking heavily in a neighborhood bar and foolishly attempts to drive home. The driver may be uncertain whether he will arrive home safely without being arrested by the police for drunk driving. This mental uncertainty is called subjective risk. The impact of subjective risk varies depending on the individual. Two persons in the same situation can have a different perception of risk, and their behavior may be altered accordingly. If an individual experiences great mental uncertainty concerning the occurrence of a loss, that person's behavior may be affected. High subjective risk often results in conservative and prudent behavior, while low subjective risk may result in less conservative behavior. For example, assume that a motorist previously arrested for drunk driving is aware that he has consumed too much alcohol. The driver may then compensate for the mental uncertainty by getting someone else to drive the car home or by taking a cab. Another driver in the same situation may perceive the risk of being arrested as slight. The second driver may drive in a more careless and reckless manner. A low subjective risk results in less conservative driving behavior. Chance of loss. Chance of loss is closely related to the concept of risk. Chance of loss is defined as the probability that an event will occur. Like risk, probability has both objective and subjective aspects. The first one is objective probability. Objective probability refers to the long-run relative frequency of an event based on the assumptions of an infinite number of observations and of no change in the underlying conditions. Objective probabilities can be determined in two ways. First, they can be determined by deductive reasoning. These probabilities are called a priori probabilities. For example, the probability of getting ahead from the toss of a perfectly balanced coin is 1/2 because there are two sides and only one is ahead. Likewise, the probability of rolling a 6 with a single die is 1/6, since there are 6 sides and only one side has 6 dots. Second, objective probabilities can be determined by inductive reasoning rather than by deduction. For example, the probability that a person aged 21 will die before age 26 cannot be logically deduced. However, by a careful analysis of past mortality experience, life insurers can estimate the probability of death and sell a 5-year term life insurance policy issued at age 21. The second one is subjective probability. Subjective probability is the individual's personal estimate of the chance of loss. Subjective probability need not coincide with objective probability. For example, people who buy a lottery ticket on their birthday may believe it is their lucky day and overestimate the small chance of winning. A wide variety of factors can influence subjective probability, including a person's age, gender, intelligence, education, and the use of alcohol or drugs. In addition, a person's estimate of a loss may differ from objective probability because there may be ambiguity in the way in which the probability is perceived. For example, assume that a slot machine in a casino requires a display of 3 lemons to win. The person playing the machine may perceive the probability of winning to be quite high. But if there are 10 symbols on each reel and only one is a lemon, the objective probability of hitting the jackpot with 3 lemons is quite small. Assuming that each reel spins independently of the others, the probability that all 3 will simultaneously show a lemon is the product of their individual probabilities. 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10 equals 1/1000. This knowledge is advantageous to casino owners who know that most gamblers are not trained statisticians and therefore likely to overestimate the objective probabilities of winning. Chance of loss versus objective risk. Chance of loss can be distinguished from objective risk. Chance of loss is the probability that an event that causes a loss will occur. Objective risk is the relative variation of actual loss from expected loss. The chance of loss may be identical for 2 different groups, but objective risk may be quite different. For example, assume that a property insurer has 10,000 homes insured in Los Angeles and 10,000 homes insured in Philadelphia, and that the chance of a fire in each city is 1%. Thus, on average, 100 homes should burn annually in each city. However, if the annual variation in losses ranges from 75 to 125 in Philadelphia, but only from 90 to 110 in Los Angeles, objective risk is greater in Philadelphia, even though the chance of loss in both cities is the same. Peril and hazard. The terms peril and hazard should not be confused with the concept of risk discussed earlier. Let's define peril first. Peril is defined as the cause of loss. If your house burns because of a fire, the peril or cause of loss is the fire. If your car is damaged in a collision with another car, collision is the peril or cause of loss. Common perils that cause loss to property include fire, lightning, windstorm, hail, tornado, earthquake, flood, burglary, and theft. The next one is hazard. A hazard is a condition that creates or increases the frequency or severity of loss. There are 4 major types of hazard. The first one is the physical hazard. The second is the moral hazard. The third one, attitudinal hazard or moral hazard. And the fourth is the legal hazard. Physical hazard. A physical hazard is a physical condition that increases the frequency or severity of loss. Examples of physical hazards include icy roads that increase the chance of an auto accident, defective wiring in a building that increases the chance of a fire, and a defective lock on a door that increases the chance of theft.